Quick, what does this sketch of a person have in common with this photo of Mars and this photo of vase? Hello, I am Mr. Credible, Master of Science Psychology with a bit of an obsessive interest in humans. And today, I'm going to talk to you about your weird friend's favorite term, pattern recognition. Let's first get the official definition out of the way. Pattern recognition is usually defined as something like an ability to recognize and identify a complex whole composed of many different elements. But that is not really the definition we mostly use now, is it? We generally think of pattern recognition as noticing connection between events that happen in real life. There are many types of patterns you could recognize. Maybe you realized that most football fans tend to be men. Maybe you realized that most babies seem to be born in August. Or maybe you have simply spent way too much time on Wikipedia's early life section. However, pattern recognition is so much more than that. In fact, you're doing it in this very moment. What you perceive as a video of me talking is actually the flow of 24 frames per second, which your brain combines into a single coherent movement instead of a stream of shots. Some scientists would go as far as to claim that pattern recognition is one of the most fundamental things that makes us human.
If she got the skills to earn money, power, and respect, you don't think she got good pattern recognition? Those skills transfer.
So questions arise. How do we perceive patterns? How does our mind organize them? What can we do with patterns once we have recognized them? At the turn of the 20th century, the dominant view in psychology was structuralism, the belief that all ideas, even the most abstract and complex ones, are simply a byproduct of the more simple ideas. They claim that we combine these simple ideas into more intricate ones simply because they are grouped together. Sort of like Legos being stacked together, creating larger and more complex structures that you can recognize. Listening to a melody is simply a process of our mind combining aspects such as rhythm, amplitude, or pitch into what we perceive as music. However, this idea was challenged by three scientists living in Germany, Max Wertheimer, Kurt Koffka, and Wolfgang Kohler. They started a movement called Gestalt psychology, which drastically changed the way we perceive. For example, they found a key aspect of perception that structuralism was missing: configuration. We are not just adding simplest aspects together. Our brain actively reinterprets them in entirely new ways. And this makes us see more than there actually is. Arguably, the most famous principle that is covered is prejudice, which is not actually pronounced like that, but ich spreche kein Deutsch. This principle states that when stimulus is ambiguous, perception will be good. What good actually means, Gestalt psychologists have never properly defined. However, you can think of it as something as simple or symmetric. For example, if you look at the picture A, how would you say that the object with the white area looks like? Here are three options to choose from. According to prejudice, people intuitively choose option B, because it is the most simple one. Essentially, they propose that our brains perceive in fuck it, good enough type of logic, instead of bothering with all the small details.
The important thing you need to know is that you don't know shit. What you see, what you hear. Nothing is what it seems.
This is a very efficient way of perceiving. By grouping patterns together, they can be quickly and easily recognized. However, this also means that our mind will project their expectations on what we are seeing and can make us assume what we think we see. This leaves our perception vulnerable to camouflage. Let's do a thought experiment. Imagine you're hiking alone through the Santa Monica Mountains, and suddenly you hear a sound in the distance. You turn around to look at what might have caused that sound. What made that noise? Is there anything you should be careful about? If you didn't see anything suspicious, well, my friend, you're in danger, because you just missed a dangerous predator. This is because many animals have evolved to camouflage well into the environment they inhabit. So when our brain configures what our eyes are seeing, it can miss some crucial details. And sometimes that can be life-threatening. The very system that should simplify perception can make it more tasking if something is designed to be hidden. And that can have deadly consequences. Our pattern recognizing brains are getting tricked. It sure is a good thing that this only applies to our physical senses and not the way we think.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted.
We do not perceive the world as it is. We combine patterns in a way that makes sense to us. This makes it easy to go through our everyday life without being exhausted by all the thinking and perceiving that we have to do. But it can also make us get stuck in our ways, seeing the world as we expect it to be instead of the way it actually is. This human tendency to see patterns in unrelated objects and physically see things that are not there is called apophenia. But sometimes all you need is a bit change in perspective. Now, I want you to look at this photo. What is the first thing you saw? If you focused on the white part, you have probably seen two faces staring at each other. But if you focused on the black part, it was probably a vase. Even if nothing physically changed, you can completely change what you're perceiving simply by directing your attention elsewhere. If you focus on just one aspect, you're missing the whole picture. And this applies to thinking as well. By letting go of our implicit bias, instead of perceiving the world as we expect it to be, we can actually perceive it more to what it actually is. You probably haven't consciously thought about this, but I would bet that most of you have presumed that I'm speaking to this microphone. But as my father always said,
assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups.
Unfortunately, Gestalt psychology research will soon be slowed down, for quite ironic reasons. There was a regime change that drastically changed the political landscape at the time. In 1933, a new chancellor was appointed in Germany, the Austrian painter with a funny mustache. He had new and pretty radical ideas on how to approach scientists as well as the science itself. The state's goal wasn't to examine the nature of human condition, nor how people behave in different situations. They wanted to impose what they believed to be right. So people and ideas that the chancellor wasn't a fan of were, well, scrapped.
Fucking Nazis about everything.
I'm sure this has no relation to current events. You see, Kurt Koffka and Max Wertheimer, 2 out of 3 scientists who started Gestalt psychology, were of Jewish ethnicity. While Koffka was already out of Germany, Wertheimer, seeing the way the new chancellor was speaking about Jewish people, has decided to put his pattern recognition skills into use and move to America before things escalated any further. He ended up passing of coronary embolism in 1943, avoiding what would be a very awkward work interaction. Kochler, the only member who wasn't Jewish, has stayed, but he wrote the last official piece criticizing the current government in the 1930s called Conversations in Germany. While he expected to be arrested, he did not have any problems until months later when he publicly refused to do the Roman salute.
Thank you.
A century ago, it was the Nazis telling Jews to stop noticing. After this, he has also escaped to USA. However, there were others who continued the work of Gestalt psychologists. For example, Haidar has applied Gestalt theory of perception to people. You see, he argued that we use context to attribute motives to others. This little clip, made in 1944, shows movements of objects. But due to the way they move, many would attribute agency to them. We give them personalities and intentions. Solomon Asch has shown that we use context with a group of American college students. When presented the Thomas Jefferson quote, "A little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical," they often strongly agreed. I don't know how Thomas Jefferson actually sounded, but that's the best I can do. However, if the same statement was attributed to Lenin, their agreement would drop drastically. The students responded differently because we do not evaluate information out of context. We integrate it along with our already pre-existing beliefs. There is a sort of confirmation bias going on here. We interpret everything that we perceive based on how well it fits what we already believe, and that which does not affirm our worldview is simply discarded. But there is more to pattern recognition than just perceiving, or even thinking for that matter. The Black Death was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, and it ravaged Europe from 1346 to 1352. The initial cause of the plague were probably fleas carried by ship rats, which then spread from person to person. Through modern experiments, we came to believe that this strain of plague descended from Yersinia pestis, originating in Kyrgyzstan about a decade prior. A chronicler, Agnora de Tura, described the consequences of Black Death as such: father abandoned child, wife, husband, one brother another. For this illness seemed to strike through the breath and sight. And so they died, and none could be found to bury the dead for money or friendship. Members of a household brought their dead to a ditch as best they could, without priest, without divine offices. Great pits were dug and piled deep with a multitude of dead, and they died by the hundreds both day and night. And as soon as those ditches were filled, more were dug. And I, Agnora de Tura, buried my 5 children with my own hands. And there were also those who were so sparsely covered with earth that the dogs dragged them forth and devoured many bodies throughout the city. There was no one who wept for any death, for all awaited death. And so many died that all believed it was the end of the world. People were scared, angry, and confused. And the blame fell on Jewish people, who were said to cause the plague by poisoning the wells. In the pogroms that followed, thousands of Jews were beaten or burned to death by Christians who believed them to have caused the plague. Today, we understand how plague spreads, and we have a pretty good idea of where it originated, so we know that even if Jewish people were not as affected by plague, they are not the ones who caused it. As any smug science student will tell you, correlation is not causation. Things can be correlated due to different factors. Jews were simply not as affected by plague because they had higher hygiene standards and they followed laws of kashrut, dietary rules on what food can be eaten and how it is supposed to be prepared. Except this claim has zero scientific basis. Washing your hands has no effect on how much will this strain of the plague spread. And Jewish people have died en masse like everybody else. The quote from 1348, 1 year after the plague started. It cannot be true that the Jews, by such a heinous crime, are the cause or occasion of the plague, because through many parts of the world, the same plague, by the hidden judgment of God, has afflicted and afflicts the Jews themselves and many other races who have never lived alongside them. This quote is by Pope Clement VI. His personal physician concluded that the well poisoning argument is absurd, and Pope issued 2 papal bulls to try and protect Jewish people. But against the crazed masses, it didn't do much. Not only was there no causation here, there didn't seem to be any correlation. Jewish people were affected and dying as anybody else. Terrified masses have put the blame for plague on humans, somebody who they could point to, who has agency and can be punished. The places which saw the most persecution were not one where the plague hit the hardest. It was where the local population had the most to gain from persecuting Jews. In places where Jewish people were a vital part of the economy, they saw very little persecution. And in the places where there were no Jewish people, some other group was made to take the blame for the plague. There is one European country that broke this pattern. Poland has suffered far less consequences from the plague than anybody else. Arguably not even that much. Academics are not in agreement, but the combination of geographical location of Poland as well as King Kazimierz III the Great regulating the amount of people coming in has slowed down the spread of plague massively. Given that at the time there already was a vibrant Jewish community in Poland, this made it basically a safe haven for European Jews from 14th century onwards, which makes it especially tragic as Poland was the first country targeted by aforementioned Nazi regime in 1930s. It all comes full circle. In the 1930s, there was roughly 9 million Jewish people living in entire Europe. 3.5 million of those were living in Poland alone, and several years later, that number was counted in hundreds of thousands. About half of the population that died in Poland was Jewish, and about half of Holocaust victims were Polish. What once was a safe haven against persecution turned into the biggest imaginable death trap. We humans are complex beings. Our thoughts, emotions, and ideas are relatively unique, and as a population we create a large interconnected web of ideas. Many of them good, many of them bad. But these ideas are weaved together, continuously creating something new, but also repeating something old. And there are patterns here as well. So, what is the pattern behind these ideas? What is the cause behind this type of thinking? What makes us conspiracy theorists? These questions will be answered in the next video. If you enjoyed this one, I appreciate it. Please like and comment. It helps with the algorithm, especially in these early stages.